No matter what you want to think about it, Necromancer is an extremely controversial trait, specifically the added effect where you can revive yourself after being downed while solo. On one hand, it helps people enjoy the game more, going as far as to say some players don't play solo without taking solo Necro with them. On the other hand, I've seen many instances where players on teams just get so frustrated when they die to someone who revived themselves thanks to solo Necro. Let's take a look at Necro, what it does, why people love it, and hate it, and think of some ways that we could tweak it so that everyone appreciates it more. When addressing the balance of a trait, I think it's important to keep in mind that players of different experience and skill levels are going to have vastly different experiences with those traits. So the same reason a trait might be okay at a high level play could be the same reason why it's bad at a low level play. From a design perspective, we have to ask, is giving that benefit to one of these groups worth potentially hindering the other? Now, this trade-off doesn't always happen, but we have to keep in mind that people with different experiences are going to experience the same trait in vastly different ways. As a player, it can be really hard to look outside of your own perspective and understand the balance of the game and the player base as a whole to understand someone else's experience and how that impacts a trait. It's also important to keep in mind that game designers have levers that they can pull and adjust to manage a trait or mechanic. The thing is that when they pull one of those levers, it may have an impact somewhere else in the game that may or may not be intended. It's almost impossible to make a single change about a mechanic that doesn't trickle down into other areas of gameplay. This can all go for better or for worse. For Solo Revive, we have to remember that it came from the intent of helping solos in trade situations, especially because Hunt has a generous trade window in a lot of situations. And as a solo, it wasn't a good experience to frequently trade with other players and then just be out without another option, especially because Hunt has such a low time to kill. It really dampened the solo experience for a lot of players, getting hit by a random sniper or making a trade after killing the other members of a team. And I would say to that effect, solo Necro really helped the solo experience. I know I've seen many comments of players who refuse to play solo without solo Necro equipped. On the inverse of that, I've seen comments about players talking about how solo Necro removes the stakes of the game, where they enjoyed the high tension play where one simple mistake could end their character. Now really, that's still part of Hunt's charm, but solo Necro really does lower those stakes. And so I can see the arguments of why someone would insist to use it and someone would refuse to use it. Let's look at some of the problems people have with it, take a moment to see if they're valid complaints, and then we'll look at some solutions that might help resolve some of that. There are a few problems I want to call out that I've heard people talk about. The first is that it feels bad to die to someone you already killed. And if we were just talking about game balance, I think this would be perfectly valid. But the problem is, what's balanced at a high level of play is rarely balanced at a lower level of play. And in particular, this sort of mechanic really gives newer players a bad time. Generally speaking, it's unintuitive because new players don't know that they can revive themselves. Yes, it shows up in the tooltips, and yes, there are YouTube videos about it. But with the 10 million other things there is to learn in Hunt, this one in particular feels so much more punishing, and it can be abused by higher ranking players who know how to use it, who get to play against lower ranking players. This is thanks to the adjustment in skill-based matchmaking, where solos are going to get to face lower ranking players who are playing in teams. And the problem is, unless you're going to sit there and burn someone out, there's no way to tell when they're actually truly dead. And so then, yeah, even though there is an answer to Necromancer, newer players don't know it, and it's going to ruin their experience. And I personally know several people I've played with where when we had a bad match against a solo Necro, called it for the night, and they particularly hate that. For me, it's important to consider this from a position not of skill level, but of player experience. If you have new players coming into game, they get matched with higher ranking players who abuse a mechanic that they don't know about to win, yeah, that's going to piss them off. And frankly, Hunt itself is hard enough for new players to get into, that I think this is a downside of solo Necro that we need to keep in mind. Likewise, focusing on player experience, solo Necro results in there being a lot of wasted time in the game. Because if you kill someone, whether they're solo or not, or a duo with a hiding duo partner, for example, you still gotta sit there and burn them out. When you're at least facing a team, you can get aggressive after you down someone, and once you wipe the team, you know you're in the clear. But you deal with a solo, you've gotta babysit that body until it's burned out. Now, some people are like, well, you don't need to babysit the body. Throw fire and move on. Which really isn't a legitimate answer, because there have been a number of times where I have done that, only to find that same player later in the match hunted me down and shot me and killed me. and so that is objectively the wrong play to leave a body that isn't all the way burned out. Two other problems I want to mention is that it encourages a level of thoughtless play, and what I mean by that, both solo Necro and regular Necro do this, is there'll be situations where the person who's down or the teammate of the person who's down hears some chaos, so they try and revive themselves or the teammate accordingly. They don't know that the coast is actually clear, and sometimes will even res themselves or their partner into concertina. And when Necromancer is in a match, it's almost as if there's a, well, let's just give it a shot mentality. And yes, everything in Hunt has risk, but I feel like the just give it a shot mentality has so much more potential payoff than it does downside of risk. Anyways, if you follow Hunt at all, I'm sure you're well familiar with many of the complaints people have about solo Necro. I think it deserves a place in the game, but I do think there are some tweaks that may make it better. Here's some considerations for levers that could be pulled that would potentially improve it. Let's take a quick look. This isn't exhaustive, and I'm not going to go through all of them here. There are a few I want to touch on though, because I think they could be the most valuable. I think Necro should be a burn trait, both for solos and for groups. This way, if you wanted to use it, you still could, but you'd need to be intentional and tactful about it. You wouldn't just be reviving your teammate at a moment to hopefully be in a spot where they're luckily in the clear or not. And if you wanted to have multiple revives like you currently do, you still could do that. It would just take extra trait points and trait slots. This would also help resolve the I don't know how many lives this hunter has left problem, because at most, a solo player could only have 3 Necros on them. Now this fix has to do with resilience. I think resilience is a significant part of what doesn't feel right with Necro, because you'll have someone you downed who stand up and you shoot them, but they survive. Obviously, if you're taking more expensive, higher damage weapons, this is going to be less of a problem. But if you're bringing compact ammo, then it's going to be a bigger challenge. The suggestion I have for here is that rather than resilience instantly fills their health, it would be changed so it rapidly regenerates over the course of 4 or 5 seconds. That way, they still very quickly get back to full health, but if you see them in that revive animation and you plug them, without a doubt, they would be downed again. The Resilience Necro combination is very, very, very strong. It even allows players to survive through concertina wire that's placed on them. But if this change happened to Resilience, that would solve it, because they would take enough damage to kill them before that Resilience kicked in all the way to heal them. The next one has to do with burning. Yes, more burning buffs. I think 2 changes should happen to burning. If a hunter dies while they're on fire, they stay on fire. Also, if a hunter revives while they're on fire, they stay on fire. Doing this does 2 things. First of all, it gives a buff to incendiary ammo, which I think needs it. If you want more understanding on my perspective on that, click the video in the card. It's where I do a full breakdown of incendiary ammo. More importantly, when someone is revived through Necro, whether solo Necro or friends Necro, and they stand up and they're still on fire, then they need to make the decision, oh, do I fight and try and finish the other team, or do I take cover and heal and put out the flames? I might be an odd duck, but I think dying in the game should have pretty severe consequences, and I don't mind the burning of additional health chunks in that process. And this is a nerf to Necro both in the team sense and in the solo sense, but it also just seems to make more sense to me. Why would standing up all of a sudden put you out? Being on fire is a serious thing in Hunt. Let's keep it that. The last one I want to talk about is that I think if you're taking solo Necro, you should not get a matchmaking advantage when going into a bounty hunt. And this goes around to the conversation where people say, well, if you're complaining about a solo Necro as a team, you have no argument because it was 2 versus 1. I mean, yes, it was 2 versus 1, but sometimes because of the matchmaking compensation for solos, that solo player is twice as good as either of the people they're shooting at. I don't play solo often, but the few times I do, I feel like the players I'm going up are so incredibly oblivious that even though I'm a solo, I feel like I have an advantage in the fight. And if I'm bringing a trait that helps me revive, I don't think that should be the case. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts on Necro and the changes they should make down in the comments. Is it fair to new players? And also check out this video where I take a brand new player into the bayou for his first time.